Hey guys, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Campus Safety Voices podcast. My name is Amy Rock, and I am Campus Safety Senior Editor. And for today's episode, I had the chance to speak to Jessica Mertz, Executive Director for the Clery Center, and we talked about sexual violence prevention on college campuses. More specifically, we spoke about recent college student protests regarding an influx in campus sexual violence, particularly in Greek life. Action school administrators must take to address an increase in incidents and the culture surrounding it, how students can be advocates for themselves and also for others, tools that are available to aid in doing so, and also questions parents and students should be asking prospective schools about its crime reporting and sexual violence prevention policies. Here's our chat. Be sure to subscribe to Campus Safety's YouTube channel and like or leave a comment on our videos. Or subscribe to our Campus Safety Voices podcast on Apple and Spotify and leave a review. So I guess it would be important to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you do at the Clery Center.
Sure, yeah. My name is Jessica Mertz. I am the Executive Director of Clery Center. We are a national nonprofit that works with colleges and institutions across the country to really help them improve their practices around campus safety. Given our history, we have a particular focus on building compliance with the Clery Act and really look at the Clery Act as a roadmap for institutions to improve some of their campus safety policies and practices and procedures. So we have a number of trainings that we offer throughout the year. We also have a membership program. So institutions can join the membership program, and then we provide sort of ongoing support and technical assistance.
So not busy at all.
Yeah.
And I guess the main conversation that we're going to speak to is sexual assault on college campuses. And last year, we had said there were nationwide protests about sexual assaults, more specifically in Greek life. So what were they protesting? What were they demanding? And have you seen changes come out of these protests?
Yeah, so my background is actually in working in preventing interpersonal violence. I had spent many years at an institution and have sort of studied and researched sexual violence prevention and response for some time. And so, looking at the student activism about sexual violence that was occurring last year, we know that it's obviously not new. There has been student activism and protests trying to create change at institutions for decades. And I always think it's important to remember that we actually owe a lot to those student voices. They're responsible for a lot of the really meaningful change that has happened over the past really 50 years. I think last year, a big part of the message that I think students across the country were communicating is that was really a call to institutions to recognize and acknowledge specific environments in which they think sexual assault and other forms of harm and discrimination are being enabled. On college campuses, there's communities and there's student organizations in particular that will hold a certain degree of power. That might be for different reasons. It might be because of their identity. It might be because they have a social capital on campus. But I think that power really gives them the ability to set some of the social norms at that institution on that campus. And those social norms are part of this, larger problem that might be creating sort of dangerous environments or problematic environments for students. So it's really this combination of things. I think that student voices right now are trying to make those connections more than ever to say that this isn't just about groups that aren't being held accountable. It's about these groups that are really given this power and this privilege and this ability to determine, what's okay and what's happening, and to not be and first, asking institutions to really recognize that and to hold them responsible and to try and create some more comprehensive and meaningful change. Rather than just looking at sexual assault as an individual person's actions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know people we speak to in the healthcare realm, they say how hospitals are just kind of like a reflection in a lot of ways of what's going on in society. So it's kind of like a smaller version of what's happening, and like sort of people that have privileges over others, like these microcosms are also in college campuses and K-12 schools and hospitals as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we talk about that all the time, that colleges are often just a microcosm of, the rest of the country. And I think, obviously there's varying degrees of resources that institutions have, but I always think about institutions of higher ed as having this really unique and important responsibility because they are this microcosm. They often have access to resources, whether it's, research or, staffing that could actually create some meaningful change that could set some standards to be used in other communities. And I think that there's, we've looked at, obviously, with the Me Too movement and so many conversations that have been had in different sectors and different areas and industries around sexual violence. And I think as a society, we've come to recognize more and more that it's not just, again, like a person's actions and a person's decisions or a person abusing their power, that there's all of these other things happening that are enabling that or empowering them or even rewarding that bad behavior. And so I think this is, we're just seeing that version of this at institutions where students are asking the institution to recognize, like, how are we all creating this environment, or how are we all enabling this behavior to continue?
It's clearly very complicated and not one answer to it all. It's not like, put this policy in place and your problems are solved. It's like, it's just a wider issue, obviously, as a society. And I feel like a lot of times, the discussion of sexual violence or sexual assaults revolves around Greek life. Now, obviously, there are so many of them that are doing wonderful things. And I think it's obviously important to say that we know that sexual assaults or sexual violence aren't only happening at these types of places. So what actions can school administrators take to address higher incidents of sexual violence in Greek life, but also just like throughout a campus as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, we know that there's institutions that don't even have Greek life, right? And that doesn't mean they don't have problems with sexual violence. I think it's really important, like you're saying, that this is a much more complex problem to understand and to address and to prevent than just creating a policy or a singular prevention program. So I think it's really important for school administrators and campus leaders to take the time to understand their specific environment and the community factors at their institution that are leading to increased risk of sexual assault. So what is it about your community, your environment? What are students' experiences? Some of that can happen through these climate surveys that have happened over the years. Some of it can happen by just building relationships with students and building trust and getting to know them and listening to them. But it really isn't a one size fits all model, that there might be in different schools, different environments or different groups or different student organizations where there is, increased risk or there is more assaults happening. So really taking the time to know your specific institution's culture, I think is important, and not just ignoring that. We always look to the Clery Act to help help colleges and universities sort of build a roadmap. We think that it creates a useful starting point, a useful roadmap for how to address sexual assault with a more comprehensive approach, because it's looking at building effective prevention programs, ideally, having transparent policies and procedures, and making sure students know their rights and their options. So, it's three of those really core components of what we think needs to be happening all at the same time.
Okay. And obviously it's important what school administrators and colleges are doing to protect their students, but there's, no matter what you do, there's always inherent risk just anywhere. And so how can students advocate for and empower themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to talk about students, safety when it comes to sexual assault, because we know that the majority of sexual assaults are being perpetrated by somebody that the person might know or trust. So, we're often sort of letting our guard down in those scenarios and not thinking about being at some sort of an increased risk. But the thing that we talk to students about is encouraging them to, first of all, think more broadly about the role that they can play in creating a safer campus environment, whether it's supporting their friends or speaking up and being an active bystander. And then I think for individual student safety, what I always ask students to think about is what is going to make you feel safer? What's going to make you feel less vulnerable? What's going to make you feel, more confident and empowered and more a part of this community? Is that going to be finding a community group of, an organization that you feel safe in, that you feel connected to? Is it learning about the rights and the resources that you have and better understanding the policies? What are the things that are going to make you really feel like a part of this sort of environment and this community in a safe way? And then we talk about some of the sort of, day-to-day, and this is not just about sexual assault, but in general, feeling safe in your campus community, and the different strategies that folks can use. And I think having a general awareness of your surroundings, of, where you are and where you need to be and how to get from point A to point B, and, thinking about a safety plan and talking to your friends proactively about that. I think so often college students aren't thinking of themselves necessarily as being at risk for any type of, harm or abuse. And so it's hard because we don't want to make them fearful. But at the same time, that having that sense of awareness helps you really think through, what if, who would I call if X happened, who can I trust, who can I reach out to, and try and really build out that safety plan for themselves.
What are some safety tools you recommend students have on hand to protect themselves?
Yeah, again, I really think about it as less about protecting yourself and more about what are the things that you have on hand that are going to make you feel safe, or that are going to, help you if you find yourself in an unsafe situation or an emergency. And this again goes beyond just thinking about sexual assault, but in any sort of scenario that could come up for folks. We know that students are most likely to have their phone on them, that they are very connected to their technology and their phone. So thinking about how can your phone be a resource for you, a tool for you. There are a number of safety apps that are provided. Schools themselves might provide them, but thinking about how could I utilize my phone in an emergency? Thinking about other sort of identification that you have on hand. Again, like knowing your way around a certain environment, knowing how to get out of a building if you needed to, things like that are just sort of general awareness. But we forget often that college students are usually in completely new environments. They don't know all of these things, that these are all new places for them. So I think it's just important to take some of that time to really feel familiar and comfortable and safe with where you are.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of them, it's obviously their first time being away from home, and it's just like learning to be like an advocate for yourself. Whereas, if you lived at home, you had trusted your parents to keep you safe, or your school teachers in K-12. But then when you go to college, it's just like a completely different world and environment. It's just like overwhelming. I mean, obviously I remember going to college and just, you kind of, I think now I graduated in 2011. So I feel like there's been like a lot more awareness brought about like the dangers that can happen. But I remember being at parties and stuff, and like that was stuff that I feel like hardly ever crossed my mind, when that's mortifying now, because that's something that should have been like, not living fearfully, but just being aware of your surroundings. And it's a lot for kids to take in when they're 18 years old, like they're babies.
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially, that's why we think, from our perspective and the work we do, it's so important that institutions are really putting the work in to build trust, because usually there are some really good tools and resources that a school is offering, whether it's through public safety or through, campus housing. And in order for students to utilize them, they have to know what they are, and they have to trust that you're gonna be supportive and non-judgmental and listen to them. And so I think, that awareness raising and that trust building is so important, because they're not gonna utilize those resources if they don't know they're there, and they don't trust them.
Right. And speaking about like feeling safe in your surroundings, we have said on campus safety, a lot of times people will send us these lists that are like, look, our school made the safest schools in America list, and we don't cover those because there's just so much that goes into what makes a school safe that it's just way more complicated than like a small amount of statistics. And so we know solely can't go by that number because oftentimes schools with higher reported crimes have the proper reporting measures in place for students. And a lot of times the safer schools might be the ones that have higher reported crimes, whether sexual violence or any sort. So it's obviously very complex for parents trying to find a school that they feel comfortable with their child attending. So for parents or students who are in the process of applying to schools, what are some questions they should be asking their prospective schools about campus safety and, I guess more specifically, sexual violence prevention to help them determine if a school is safe?
Yeah, it is really hard, and it's such a difficult thing for families to navigate because there's so many things that you're looking at and factors you're considering when making a school decision, a big decision like that. And I would say first and foremost, even before looking at what at the institution itself, I would say the priority is having a conversation with your student, and talking to them about what concerns they might have and what safety issues they might be, worried about, and just making sure there's that open dialogue there so that you're not just as a parent, especially focusing on like what your concerns are, because parents often get it wrong. What they're thinking is like the biggest risk or the biggest issue might not be aligned with what the student is, or what the reality of like young people's experiences are. So just having that conversation and that dialogue, and really understanding like what is it that's going to make my student in particular feel safe, and be in an environment and be in a community where they feel supported and feel like it's a place that they want to be. When looking at schools, we always encourage parents to look at the annual security report. Obviously, that's there for a reason, that the ASR should be providing information about the school's policies and prevention efforts, and of course its crime statistics related to sexual violence, dating, domestic violence, and stalking. And if that's not easy to find, or if it doesn't have the information it should in it, that to me would be a little bit of a red flag, or at least tell you that you should dig a little bit deeper and inquire some more. I think it's if it's easy to find information about a school's resources and their prevention efforts related to sexual violence, and that will tell you a lot about that school's transparency and how much of a priority it is. If it's easy for you to find it without having to like get a person on the phone, then that tells you it's going to be easy for your student to find it too. And I think that in itself is a good indicator that it's something that the school is really taking seriously and addressing more comprehensively. And if you are, having a conversation, or if you're able to actually talk to people about it, I think the question I would encourage families to ask is, what is the school's approach? What's their philosophy, to addressing sexual assault? And to see, again, I think that response will tell you a lot about, are they trying to, sort of ignore this issue or downplay this issue, or, pretend like it's not something that needs to be dealt with, or are they recognizing the reality of it and really putting the time and resources into making their students safer? So I think that transparency really will tell you a lot, and will increase the likelihood that your student will feel safe and will be able to build some trust with administrators at the institution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like sometimes parents, they're older than they think they are, so they think they're like so in touch with like how things are going like in the world of younger people. And I mean, I'm guilty of it now, having little kids, where I like, you think you're so aware of what's going on, but you're not the one living through what young people are living through. So the best thing is to just talk to them. So
and from my experience at an institution, and I would often talk to parents whose students were just starting, or when they were considering the school, and their concern was always like a threat of violence or harm from people outside the institution, that like crime in the area or things like that. And we'd always have to sort of focus them on, well, let's think about the harm that can be within the school itself, and the reality that things like hazing and stalking and sexual assault are often going to be committed by another member of this community. And that's a really hard thing for a school to say, because the school understandably doesn't want to create any fear and doesn't want to make it seem like they're allowing these issues to occur. But the reality of it is, like, you have to acknowledge that before you're going to be able to actually address it and do something about it. So yeah, I think it's really important to talk to the students themselves to figure out, like, what are the real harms here, and what are the things that we need to be aware of.
Okay. And we also cover K-12 schools on campus safety, and obviously sexual violence and assaults doesn't only happen on college campuses or to people of a certain age. So can any of the actions, we've discussed or that you've recommended for college administrators, also be applied to administrators in K-12 schools?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we've seen, I've been following the news in the past couple of months, and we've obviously seen a wave of sort of protests and high school students speaking out against sexual harassment and violence occurring at their school as well. So I'm glad to see that, those students are feeling empowered to speak out also, because it can be even harder for high school students, I think, to really find their voice and feel safe doing that. I think certainly some of the same things apply in terms of administrators understanding what are the high risk situations that are happening at their school. What are the groups or the communities in which there might be increased assault happening, and how can they really understand the sort of environmental factors that are might be making people unsafe, and some of the ways that you're going to address that are dependent on knowing where it's happening and why it's happening. Obviously, having policies and just being really transparent about, here's where you can go, if you experience sexual assault, and talking to high school students about that bystander intervention piece, and how they can, speak up and support a friend, and try and, do their part in creating a healthier, safer campus community. High school community, I say, but it all translates, right? And I think it's just important to think about the same way we do with institutions of higher ed. Important to think about it's not just going to be a one size fits all, and it's not just going to be a quick fix or like a one-time presentation, that it is about, having this more sort of comprehensive approach.
Yeah, I think it's not related to sexual violence, but obviously I think the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas made such a big impact on students, like having voices for themselves, no matter what the topic is. And I just feel like that was such a catalyst, and you see so many more students willing to speak up for themselves and their friends, no matter what the topic is, but related to campus safety and feeling safe. And I think, at least something good came out of such a terrible thing. And like, I hope that it just keeps students need to realize that, yeah, adults make the rules and they're the ones that make the decisions, but like you can make such a big difference and such an influence, and it's important.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree. It's been really encouraging to see young people feeling empowered and safe to use their voice. And I think even just, this generation having access because of having grown up on social media, and having this degree of awareness of sort of what's happening and the reality. I look at my young children, and even apart from the fact that this is what I do for a living, they have an awareness of things like sexual assault and harm, and are not isolated from those realities. And it allows me to really have a conversation with them about it at a younger age, and I think gives them a perspective as a young person of what can they do to address it. And I'm really hopeful that that's going to continue to create the change that we want to see.